Hello, parishioners. This is Father Mark, and it's day 61 of the Bible in a Year. And we'll look first at Numbers chapter 11. And here we have, the continuation of the story of the Israelites just having left Mount Sinai in the middle of the Sinai Peninsula, where they had spent 2 years. And here we have the beginning of that journey. In the last chapter, in verse 33, there's an interesting little phrase. It says that they started out from the Mount of the Lord, and they went 3 days' journey. So it just kind of mentions they had a 3-day journey at the beginning, and that's kind of interesting because that's what it says in the book of Exodus when they left Egypt, and they were just beginning that journey to Mount Sinai. And here, when they're leaving Mount Sinai, they do a 3-day journey, and then it describes some other things that happened. But that sort of 3-day advance, was kind of in both, and that's because there's a number of parallels actually in the book of Exodus, and the book of Numbers seems chaotic, but actually there's a parallelism. There's a literary kind of structure that's so. There's some similarities about how they left Egypt and went to the Mount Sinai, and then when they left Mount Sinai and going toward the Promised Land, similar things. So there's actually 4 things. The first is that both of these descriptions begin with the Passover. Obviously, leaving Egypt, on that night they did the Passover meal and put the blood of the lamb on the doorposts and the angel of death, and they got away from the slavery because of the Passover. And here too, it does mention also in the last chapter that it was a Passover time, and they did a Passover meal before they left, and so that's one similarity. And then another is that they both begin with that 3-day advance in the wilderness, and then the third thing is that in both legs of the journey, you've got murmuring and complaining. The Israelites complain and grumble against Moses. And fourthly, there's also descriptions of how they regret having left Egypt, especially because of the Egyptian cuisine, because of the foods of Egypt. They kind of complain and dream about the leeks and the flesh pots of Egypt. So those are the kind of similarities between the trip to Sinai and the trip away from Sinai. There's those parallels and similarities. But chapter 11 here has several times it mentions this kind of complaining, and that the anger of the Lord was kindled. In fact, there was a fire that burned out from the holy place, and some of the people were burned, it says. But it says Moses prayed in verse 2 and interceded, and the fire abated. So Moses is always helping to save the people, and because they're so deserving of punishment, but Moses interceding for them. Here in verse 4, we see they're saying, "Oh, that we had meat to eat." They're complaining, and they start dreaming of all these different things that they used to eat in Egypt. And so Moses prays, and in verse 14 it says he complains to God. He said, "I am not able to carry all this people alone. The burden is too heavy." And even says, "Kill me at once, so that I may not see my wretchedness." So here we have Moses kind of in despair, and so I guess that's okay. Of course, it is wrong to commit suicide, but if you pray that God would send you death, that number of Job as well. And here Moses, it's praying this way is just a way of voicing your feelings to God, but trusting and hope and wanting His will, God's will be done, of course. And we have that interesting story about Eldad and Medad, who were not among the 70 who were there when the Holy Spirit came down upon them, and they prophesied. And these two were out in the camp. They weren't in the place where Moses was, and yet they also prophesy. And Moses says, that's okay. Let them prophesy, because I wish everyone would be able to prophesy and have the Holy Spirit upon them. Verse 29. And that's the prayer that eventually was answered, of course, when God sent the Holy Spirit upon the church at Pentecost. We have in the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 10, at the end there's kind of an interesting little phrase. It says that your fathers, the Israelites, went down to Egypt. Jacob and his sons, remember, Jacob and his 12 sons, during the famine, they went down into Egypt. 70 persons, all the children and grandchildren, there were 70 at that time. So that's why that number 70 comes up, and it's kind of the number of the people of Israel. 12 obviously is his number of the people, but also 70. And so here it says, Moses says, but now the Lord has made you as the stars of heaven for a multitude. So, and of course we know that Jesus picked 12 apostles and also sent out 70 disciples at one point too. It's all images of the church and of the people of God. These numbers are symbolic of God's people.